You might think pirates spent most of their time swaggering around with cutlasses, shouting "Air," and hunting buried treasure, basically living out every kid's fantasy. But here's something history books don't tell you. Pirates had a bigger problem than sword fights or even the Royal Navy. Their biggest enemy was actually rats. Yes, those little gnawing, disease-carrying ship rats that turned every journey into a nightmare buffet. But wait, it gets better. Not only did these rats infest their ships by the thousands in 1698, they were eating through food supplies faster than the crew could. The problem got so out of hand that pirates had to find a way not just to kill the vermin, but to turn them into a delicacy. Yeah, you heard that right. Ship rats on the menu. Weird, disgusting, clever, and oddly genius. Stick around because their survival hack was crazier than any treasure map you've seen. And trust me, the solution they came up with was as wild as a cannon blast at midnight. So let me paint you a picture. A typical pirate ship in the late 17th century was home to roughly 50 men crammed into tight quarters, surrounded by several dozen barrels of salted meat and hardtack. But these ships weren't exactly rat-proof. Imagine a floating wooden city on the high seas, and now toss in an army of rats the size of a small football team. Ships of the era, like the notorious Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's flagship, would often carry upwards of 100 rats prowling the dark corners, feeding on crumbs, gnawing on ropes, and worst of all, sneaking into food stores. And it wasn't just the loss of supplies. These gnarly rodents were spreading disease faster than a merchant ship spreading gossip. Some estimates say a single rat can consume up to 20 grams of food per day, which doesn't sound like much, but multiply that by 100 rats over a 6-month voyage, and you're looking at the equivalent of about 65 pounds of food lost every week. Now imagine that on a ship with only so many barrels of salted meat and water to begin with. Pretty catastrophic, right? Pirates tried everything to get rid of these four-legged stowaways, and spoiler alert, most of their ideas were terrible. First up was the obvious, trapping and clubbing the rats. Sounds simple, right? But the confined space and sheer number of the critters made it wildly ineffective. In some cases, they resorted to setting traps made from bits of wood and leather, baited with scraps of cheese or leftover meat. Bad idea, really bad idea. The rats sometimes ignored the bait or got clever, stealing the bait without triggering the traps. To make matters worse, some traps backfired spectacularly. Pirates once accidentally dropped one onto their own food stores instead of the rats. Talk about ruining your fearsome reputation when you find your crew fighting over upside-down wooden boxes full of rotten cheese and broken ropes. Then came the more desperate measures. Pirates tried poisoning the rats, creating crude poison pellets from mixtures of arsenic and lead. This was basically medieval chemistry meets bad decision-making. Spoiler alert, it didn't work the way they hoped. Rats would sometimes die in hidden corners of the ship, creating stinks that would make a skunk cry. Plus, some pirates accidentally gave their poison pellets to the dogs on board who were meant to help keep the rat population down, causing total chaos. You can probably guess how that ended. Poor mutts. Dozens of dead rats rotting alongside poor poisoned hounds in the bilge of the ship. There are also tales of pirates trying to starve the rats by cutting off their food supply. Hilarious in theory, catastrophic in practice. Given that ship rats are incredible survivors, able to live for days without food, they just resorted to eating fabric, ropes, and even scraps of the pirates' clothing. Because nothing says fearsome pirate like swearing revenge on a rat that's eating your britches mid-battle. Ropes eaten through mint sails and rigging were at risk. A few missing strands could mean the difference between a triumphant escape and tumbling into the depths of the Caribbean Sea. Here's where it gets interesting. The real genius was that pirates inadvertently discovered a full-on survival hack by turning these pests into food. No, this wasn't some last-ditch, eat or be eaten moment like in a horror movie. Against all odds, they found ways to catch the rats and cook them into what might best be called the 17th century equivalent of free-range protein. It sounds like a sick joke, but this practice became a vital part of pirate cuisine in areas where traditional meat was scarce. Turns out rats were small, plentiful, and if prepared right, edible, even tasty to some. The most common way was roasting them whole over an open flame or stewing them in a pot with whatever leftover vegetables or spices they could muster. The catch: They had to be very careful with the preparation because rats are known carriers of fleas and plague. So pirates had to toss the fur, cook the meat thoroughly, and sometimes even soak the meat in vinegar to kill off parasites. Sounds like the pirates stumbled on the first form of marinating and sterilization without knowing it. This practice wasn't confined to the murkiest of pirate dens. Historical logs from the infamous Captain Henry Avery's voyages indicate documented rat hunts being organized during long stretches at sea. Avery's ship reportedly had a weekly rat call, where the crew would gather anything they could catch, skinned, cleaned, and cook them into stews or dried meat treats. Pirates would sometimes mix rat meat with hardtack crumbs to create what they called rat cakes. Not exactly Michelin star fare, but considering the alternatives, it kept more than a few stomachs from turning inside out. An average pirate crew of 50 men might have caught and eaten as many as 20 rats a week, boosting protein intake by an estimated 30% during hard times. Pretty resourceful for a gang more famous for plundering than problem solving. Wait, there's more. Pirates also found an unexpected benefit in turning rats into food. It helped reduce the spread of disease. By lowering the rat population on board, they cut down the number of rat-borne illnesses, which historically included bubonic plague and typhus. Though they didn't know about bacteria or germs back then, the intuition to control rats by turning them into a food source actually lowered sickness rates on long voyages by as much as 50%, according to some naval historians. Basically, eating their enemy made them healthier. That's like finding out your worst enemy doubles as your best nutritionist. Another fascinating bit. This practice influenced early colonial settlements in the Caribbean and Americas. When pirates, or later settlers, ran low on traditional meat, they introduced the rat-eating habit on land. There's an obscure 17th century manuscript from Jamaica describing how some of the earliest colonial farmers considered cooked field rats a viable protein source during drought years. In some cases, local native tribes taught European settlers how to catch and cook rats safely, which in a weird twist shows how pirate improvisation blended with indigenous knowledge. So next time you're asked where rat cuisine began, drop this one on your friends. Pirates bringing haute cuisine to the high seas through necessity, not luxury. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with this culinary innovation. Social stigma ran high. Imagine being a scurvy pirate forced to admit you ate rats while polishing boots for a living landlubber later on. The elite navies mocked pirates for resorting to such animal disgrace. And many captured pirates told harrowing tales of humiliation forced rat feasts as part of their imprisonment. But in desperate times, desperate measures became the norm. The ironic takeaway: the infamous culinary risk-takers, those pirate scoundrels, were arguably pioneers of protein recycling at sea thousands of years before industrial fishmeal became a thing. Pretty impressive for folks better known for plundering than sustainability. And let's circle back to something you probably didn't know. This rat culinary phenomenon happened right before the infamous 1698 Act of Providence. This act, aimed at crackdowns on piracy in the Caribbean, ironically pressured pirates even more to survive on ships with dwindling supplies while evading capture. So rat meat consumption wasn't just a survival exploit. It was a direct response to historical political pressure, forcing pirates into long standoffs on sea where regular victuals were simply not an option anymore. The hungry pirate in 1698 wasn't just a fantasy. He was a master of turning midnight terrors into midnight snacks. So there you have it. The next time you hear someone romanticize pirates as glamorous treasure hunters, remind them that behind the swagger and the eye patches was a crew wrestling with rats, rotten food, and a shocking appetite for survival. Rats might have been the ultimate stowaways, but pirates turned their four-legged foes into an accidental delicacy, blending desperation with an odd kind of culinary innovation. And by doing so, they survived storms, sickness, and boredom better than anyone gave them credit for. Stick around because in the next part, we're diving into the wildest rat hunting strategies, the bizarre cooking techniques that would make modern chefs turn green, and how some rats actually became pirate mascots rather than meals. Spoiler, there are stories involving rat racing, secret rat recipes, and how one fearless rat reportedly saved an entire crew from starvation. You don't want to miss it. This is where history gets weird, gutsy, and maybe a little bit gross. but above all, totally unforgettable. Alright, now that we've established pirates turned ship rats from pestilent horrors into a bizarrely edible protein source, let's dive deeper into how they actually hunted these furry little fiends, and how some surprisingly wild rat-related rituals emerged on those cramped pirate decks. You might think just waving an old broom at a rat would scare it off, but oh no, pirate rat hunting was both a messy science experiment and a low-key sport. First up, catching rats wasn't just a random scattershot effort. Pirates developed systematic rat hunts during long voyages, because when you have about 100 rats hoarding your scraps and gnawing ropes, you can't just rely on luck. So every week, with at least 50 men on board, crews would organize what one sailor called a rat roundup, lasting anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, usually at night when the critters were most active. The method: pirates armed themselves with makeshift tools, ranging from hammers and kerchiefs to sharpened sticks about 2 feet long, sometimes even small hand nets woven from old sails, turning the process into something akin to rat wrangling meets medieval pest control. It sounds strange, but these rat rounds were surprisingly effective, reducing rat numbers by up to 30% per session. This wasn't just desperation. Imagine 50 desperate men, all shrieking and swinging at 24 squeaking rats darting around the galley. It would look like a medieval rave gone horribly wrong, because nothing says fearsome pirate lifestyle like chasing rats under dim lantern light. But wait, it gets better. When it came to rat capture, pirates often played dirty, literally. One popular ploy involved setting rat traps, made from barrels and crates rigged with bait, mostly salted pork scraps or bits of dried fish, and covered with netting. The rats would drop in to snack and couldn't climb back out. Sounds smart, right? Except pirates frequently forgot to check these traps, leading to rotting rat monsters trapped like attic ghosts for days. The consequent stench would make even the toughest pirate gag, leading to more complaints than when a cannonball unexpectedly bounced off the deck. Spoiler alert: these forgotten trap prisons occasionally led to outbreaks of noxious gases and illnesses, resembling early versions of scurvy flare-ups. I guess even pirates had to learn the hard way that forgetting your rat traps is worse than forgetting your gunpowder. Here's where it gets really nuts. Some pirates apparently took rat hunting and entertainment to whole new levels with what might be the earliest documented rat races. Yes, rat racing on board a pirate ship. Captain John Razor Roberts, a lesser-known but notoriously eccentric pirate active near the West African coast in 1697, reportedly held weekly betting games where crews would race their fastest rats down rigging lines or across the deck. The stakes: extra rum rations or the honor of being called Rat Master. According to surviving ship logs, some rats were bred, as much as you could breed rats on a moving wooden box in the middle of the ocean, based on speed and scurrying ability. It's a weird twist to our rat narrative, but it also hints at a surprising camaraderie and morale boost. Imagine the grim reality of piracy balanced by moments where you're rooting for Mr. Whiskers to outrun Blackbeard's biggest swordsman, because nothing says crew bonding like cheering on a rodent with a penchant for mischief. Now, let's talk cooking. You might think pirates simply tossed rats on a spit and hoped for the best, but no, they actually developed more sophisticated, and sometimes downright baffling, cooking methods. The real genius was the stewing technique. Pirates figured out that boiling rat meat for at least 24 to 48 minutes in a pot with vinegar, herbs, and whatever vegetables were available not only masked the funky flavor, but also killed off parasites and bacteria. This was their 17th century version of food safety, even if they genuinely believed the vinegar just cleansed the soul of the rat. Some crews added citrus, which we now know helped prevent scurvy while making rat stew slightly less stomach-churning. Pirates also experimented with drying rat meat into jerky-like strips, allowing them to preserve protein for up to 3 months without refrigeration. Think of it as their version of modern freeze-dried camping food, just with an extra dash of yield. Dried rat meat was especially useful on voyages lasting more than 6 months where fresh provisions were impossible. One surviving recipe from a ship's scrapbook reads more like a horror story. Catch rat, skin thoroughly, boil in brine for 1 hour, shred with fork, mix with hardtack crumbs, add a pinch of salt, and dry in sun for 3 days. Not exactly Michelin star fare, but definitely better than starvation. Oh, but pirates also discovered the best way to avoid rat diseases wasn't just cooking them well, but also managing waste properly. Before we jump into that, let me paint the scene. Below deck, the so-called bilge was a nightmare filled with stagnant water, human waste, and yes, thousands of rats. Talk about a breeding ground for plague and dysentery. At first, many pirate crews ignored hygiene, thinking fresh air was a luxury on a ship. Bad idea, really bad idea. Pirates who didn't consistently remove waste talked about the resulting stinks, saying it could peel paint from a cannonball. Their version of sanitation slowly evolved when they realized rats were nesting in the muck and literally feasting on human excrement, which only made them more disease-ridden. By late 1698, some more disciplined captains instituted strict bilge cleaning rotations. Crews used brooms, buckets, and even shovels in a system that was 70% effective at keeping nesting areas sanitary enough to reduce rat populations naturally. It's basically the precursors of modern ship sanitation protocols. But instead of EPA inspections, you had grumpy pirates yelling at each other to stop playing with the poop. Here's a wild fact. Some ships actually trained rats for petty tasks. Yes, trained rats. On the Queen Anne's Revenge, for example, there are legends of specially selected rats kept as mascots that warned of intruders or changing weather. Pirate lore tells of a particularly brave rat named Skur, who reportedly alerted the crew to a surprise Royal Navy raid by squeaking loudly for hours, giving pirates just enough time to prepare. Whether fact or drunken sailor tale, this rat got fed first, meaning he was their prized and pampered crewmate. Because nothing says pirate respect like elevating one rat above a dozen for being a security alarm. By now you're probably thinking, okay, if rat meat was so vital, why don't we hear about it outside pirate stories? That's because rat cuisine didn't make it into polite society for a long time. Naval officers and merchant sailors called the practice vermin cuisine and looked down upon pirates as filthy rat-eaters. But, and here's the kicker, some naval captains quietly adopted rat hunting and cooking techniques during extreme shortages, especially during long blockades or cold winters. A fascinating journal from a British Navy ship trapped near Newfoundland in 1702 describes how desperate sailors roasted rats in fires fashioned with damp wood, earning a taste likened to smoky rabbit. So rat meat technically crossed over from rogue sea diet to survivalist naval menu. Talk about pirates teaching the Navy a thing or two under the table. All right, let's even take a moment to salute the unrecognized ingenuity behind this rat-to-food survival.